Possibly. All right. It looks like I am up and streaming, so
I'm gonna send this to my friends as well,
go for it.
so they can go follow you on there.
Get to the 69 followers on.
There we go. It'd be insane if we did that during this.
Two more. I need two more follows to get to 69. That would be nice. All right, got that
All
pulled.
right. All right. We'll just go to count in, and then people can just join in whenever at
Yep,
this
go
point.
for it. Yep.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Recording in progress.
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Rotodex, a Pokemon TCG / Pokemon history podcast, mostly focused on the TCG sets that me and a good friend of mine have lived through. But we're going to go through all of them because that's what this is all about here. So joining me on the other line, all the way in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, Austin Marshall. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing great today. I'm really excited to get started on this subject here.
I've been wanting to do a Pokemon podcast for several years now because I think the Pokemon TCG is one of the most intricate TCGs out there. And I play a lot of them. I've played Magic, I've played Yu-Gi-Oh!, I've played Pokemon, and I've even dabbled in some of the dead card games, so to speak, like Duel Masters from
Yeah.
2004. Um, but this one I keep coming back to as it's not just the collector's pieces. It's not just the card game. It's like a weird hybrid of both. And for a while there, it was following a TV show. Kind of doesn't as much anymore. It is a totally different game than pretty much anything else.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. It has an interesting mix. I mean, Pokemon. I mean, just on the games it's based off of, your job is to go and collect Pokemon, and I mean that's kind of what it feels like in the card games. It has a really interesting thing that you're not gonna get from, like, let's say, Magic the Gathering. Maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit. They didn't emphasize this as much. So I think this is kind of truly a unique card game in that aspect. I think a very good idea they had coming out of there.
And what's crazy is how the game transitioned to the United States. Game Freak started making Pokemon in like late 1994, transitions to cards in like 95, 96 era to be debuted in Japan. And it was because of the popularity in Japan that the game went worldwide, then recently into China, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're going all the way back to base set. Neither of us were alive when base set debuts, or if we were alive,
Might as well not
we
even
might as
remember
well
it.
not have been alive. I mean, we were both just incredibly young here, but there are a lot of big designs that influence the way Pokemon is played forever that came out in base set. But I don't want to just talk about this. I also want to update everybody on what's going on in the Pokemon world as well. For me, I'm doing a joy run of Pokemon Platinum right now. I picked up a copy at regionals in Maryland, and the save file that was on there has a Pokemon Ranger Manaphy on it.
Right on.
So I'm just going through a joy run. I have Manaphy on my team. I've never had a Manaphy before. Got Rotom on my team just for fun. And naturally I went Gallade as, my one of my bigger attackers in this. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm having a great time replaying this like massive Gen 4 game. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
23 hours into this. I'm just having a blast. I could have sped run it, but when the save file already said 5 hours in without the first gym badge, I was like, all right, whoever was doing this was taking their time. So I just actually finished the eighth gym today before I went to work, uh, and it was a blast. Just an absolute blast to play through these games. I really wish they would have remade it for Switch with the Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl remakes.
Yeah, I think there was some missed opportunities in there. I still enjoyed them, but I don't know. I feel like they could have definitely done a little bit more with it, to incorporate some more of the platinum material. But
I
it's
mean,
never a bad thing to go back and play the original ones. So
no, and to me, it's just it sucks because like Team Galactic really has no presence that you feel in the remakes, but in like Pokemon Platinum, I mean, the whole game is centered around like Cyrus trying to take over the world.
mhm.
As Team Galactic is stealing three legendary Pokemon and like trying to basically bring hell to the real world, which is such a great allegory for everyday life, I must say. As far as Pokemon goes in your life, where are you at other than your life falling apart because the Pokemon canon on TV is ending?
Yes. So well, before I get to that, as far as the games are concerned, I've just been playing a lot of Scarlet and Violet lately. I was doing the Cinderace raid with some friends here recently, and if I didn't have the people I was with helping me out with that, I would have definitely failed, because that was a tough one. But once we got a good strategy going, it was just kind of like farming it basically. So we've just been doing a little bit of that, getting some raids in, doing a little bit of shiny hunting. I don't know where I'm at yet, but I've been doing a little bit of that along with whatever else I'm doing in life, which, like you alluded to earlier, was the Pokemon anime. I've been watching that, for a long time, and then I've been watching it seasonally since X and Y began. So that was like back in 2013 or 14. So like, just like every week has just been, I've tried to watch Pokemon. So if you somehow missed the news that Ash is going to be leaving us for the anime, well then there you go. It People kind of knew it was coming, but it still was kind of a big talk around, especially Twitter, where I saw a lot of people talking about it. So this upcoming season, starting, I believe it's actually going to be today, when this is going up on the 13th, I believe, when the first episode of the last series of Ash, which is going to comprise of 11 episodes, is coming out. So I'm going to be watching that. It's like the last little joyride of that, tying up some loose ends about his story and how we're going to hopefully transition over to the Scarlet and Violet anime, which is going to begin in April.
It's crazy. He's lasted longer than like Yu-Gi-Oh's anime has, right? Because like Yu-Gi-Oh went through 5 seasons with the Pharaoh, 3 seasons of GX, and like a fourth in Japan,
Mm.
3 seasons of 5Ds, 3 seasons of Zexal, so many other spin-offs from the original Yu-Gi-Oh. And this whole time it has been Ash and Friends. I have found myself rewatching the advanced, like the Battle Frontier
Mm.
advanced era, Gen 3 mostly, of Pokemon because May is in it, and then her little brother Max, who is like the smartass little shit. It's so funny to me. So I've really enjoyed that, but it's crazy to see it coming to an end after he finally got his victory ring, so to speak, last year, in 2022. So what, 27 years later, he's finally a champion.
Yeah, that was fun to watch, and it was very hard to avoid spoilers throughout the entire time because it seemed like really everyone was joining in on that. A lot of people coming back for nostalgia and wanting to see his victory, even as much hate was thrown towards him, like, oh, you'll never win a championship, blah blah blah. So it seemed like everyone really came together. It was like a really exciting time for the Pokemon community, and something to wrap up his anime career with. I don't know what we're gonna see from him after that, but hopefully, maybe some cameos every once in a while, some mentions, but they'll probably start to, really drift away from that and go their own direction with someone new, which we've seen them. I don't know anything about them though, so we'll have to wait till April for that one.
Yeah, and as far as the TCG is concerned, we've got our first look at like our Paldea friends from Scarlet
Yes.
and Violet, is the Paldea collection boxes. I think that's how you say it, Paldea,
Yeah.
whatever. Um, they just released in the United States, so we've got to look at the three starters and what the new card frame is going to look like. Which, if you have played the Japanese Pokemon TCG, it looks very similar. It has the silver border to go along with English text this time. I think it looks better than the yellow personally. I've always thought Japanese cards popped a little better. But I am curious, if this means that we are going to actually try to go to a more worldwide game where everybody can use every card if they wanted to. In Magic, for example, there's no limits on languages you can use. If you have a card in German and Russian and Japanese and Korean, they can all be in the same deck. Whereas I know Pokemon tries to limit that based on where
Yeah.
you live.
And
I
it
don't
all
know.
has to be in, at least for now, it all has to be in one language. Your deck has to be all in one language. Especially, and then at like locals, I believe it has to. Well, no, I think they lifted that. But I think it is for across the board. All decks have to be in one language. Can't mix and match and do all the stuff that I know Magic can. So that's kind of their own way of doing that. So
It's honestly really, as far as like, I think it's smart because in Magic, it does give you a competitive advantage, in my opinion. I think there's lots of times where I know what my cards do and I have them in Russian, and you don't necessarily want to ask for a judge, which is crazy because
yeah.
that's what they're there for. Um, but because of that, you feel intimidated. You don't want to ask for a judge. And so I get the upper hand there. So this is honestly like, I've always been fine with the rule, but I will say, like, if we all get to the point where like we're using the same card fronts and we're requiring opaque backs, I think it'd be cool if I could show up to a Pokemon event with Japanese cards, because I do think the foiling on Japanese cards is usually better.
I agree.
And I think oftentimes they're better quality. They don't curl in your deck box as bad, which is something in the Midwest we worry about quite a bit because the the wonderful weather of the Midwest is constantly changing. Um, so that'll be really cool. As far as the Paldea collection boxes go, I think they're like $20. You get 4 packs, you get the 3 starters, and then you get like a big jumbo card, whatever you want to call it, of the one of the EXs that has been spoiled for the main set, which is really cool. They didn't really have a ton of promos back in the day, as we're going to talk about when we get more into this deep dive of base set. But how do you feel about Scarlet and Violet so far? I've not played it yet. I've watched some people do some playthroughs and things like that, but
Aside from it being a visual eyesore, I mean, like, the story is fun, it's engaging, it's compelling, or I should say the three stories, rather. All of them I had a lot of fun doing. The characters were, some people disagree on that, but I mean, I think for the most part, the characters were well written. If you think they weren't well written, they're at least more written than other Pokemon games that haven't done such a nice job doing just that. Now, that being said, like I alluded to earlier, there are some visual things that will kind of jar your eyes more than other Pokemon games. Even games earlier on in the Switch, like the Legends Arceus and Sword and Shield even, just really didn't have as much stuff going on. So, I mean, there was a lot less visual eyesore going on there. So just like movement in the background just seems really clunky, and lots of visual glitches people have been seeing. And I guess that's just kind of the transition over into the open world concept. And I think the general consensus from the community is that they just would wish Pokemon would spend a little bit more time on that instead of just trying to pump out games every year, which I can agree to. But from a business sense, like, if they know that people are going to buy the games, then, like, what's going to stop them? I mean, money's going to speak a lot more than words. But getting all that stuff aside, I mean, I thought the games were fun. I've never really focused on the graphics so much as enjoying the Pokemon game. So that's kind of my 2-minute analysis on it. Love the games. Just wish it wasn't such a visual eyesore.
Yeah, I wonder if a lot of this came from like they were running out of ideas with Sword and Shield. Obviously Pokemon is this massive media empire, and they just released, they've had the DLC out for a while. I even have, and I've only been playing Sword and Shield for just under a year now because I got my Switch back in June. Even I've struggled with like staying entertained. Like you can only catch so many, do so many legendary raids, in the raid, the Dynamax arenas and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can only find so many Diglets to help out the miner on an island. Like there are so many different things. I think they like, and the fact we don't have the full Pokédex on there is asinine. Like, I want to be able to play with my Gen 5, Gen 6, and Gen 7 homies a little bit more. Because again, I think Gen 5 is the most like undervalued Pokemon area. Like, as far as like a region goes, as far as a era goes, like the black and white era of Pokemon is so undervalued, so underrated, and you can't play them in modern games without, having multiple loopholes to jump through.
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes it a little easier in March, but we'll see if they unveil a game with a full Pokédex by then, because in March you'll finally be able to re-download things on your 3DS and get your copy of Pokemon Bank and start transferring things over to Pokemon Home.
Do that early, by the way. You're going to want to do that early because they're going to stop downloads on that at some point, and then after that, it's done. So get it while you can.
Yeah,
Even if you don't buy it, just get it, download it. That's what you need to be doing right now.
have it downloaded. I believe they're going to stop even charging for it, at least
Mm-hmm.
as far as I know.
Yes, they are.
Which means that chances are it's going to run its course very quickly. They're not going to keep it up forever, as we've learned with how quickly they took down the Gen 4 and Gen 5 communications on Nintendo DS. But obviously, we're not here to talk about the video games. We're here to talk about the card game. Do you have a guess at how many cards there are, like unique cards that have been printed over the years? It's got to be.
I would have no idea where to even start unless I went through each individual set, counted them all up, went through the Japanese promos, which I don't even know how to like. You can look through Cerebi all you want, but I guarantee you there's something on there that's just not listed. There's so many like odd and rare prints of things and across multiple different languages in different countries that it is just so crazy how many different things that they have printed.
So Yu-Gi-Oh! A couple years ago just hit 10,000 unique cards, and they celebrated this by printing a very unique card called 10,000 Dragon, which is currently selling for like $1,500 because it was like a one-off printing and a very weird set that nobody really liked. I would venture to guess Pokemon's probably in the neighborhood of 12,000 unique cards. Magic's somewhere in the ballpark of like 30, 40,000,
Yeah.
but they keep printing random shit just to make people mad. But, for the first few years, and if you follow this show, you're going to learn this. There was a lot of repeats and overlaps in sets.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was the trainers that were involved, which, fun fact, Potion and Pokeball pretty much get printed every set. Like, it's just, that's like the bulk of the game, is being able to get your Pokemon and then also being able to heal them. But, if you like think about it, like how many retrains of cards we've gotten. Like there's like 5 different versions of double colorless energy now, which is one of the cards we're going to talk about later today. There's 7,394 different Charizards. None of them really are the same,
Yeah.
That's one of the craziest things to me is like, if you think about for like the first 5 years of Pokemon, they printed cards with the same like artwork, same design, same attacks, abilities, all that over and over again, and people ate it up. And then they were like, "Well, we got to keep this going." So you get into the Neo series, and you get into the E-reader series, and then where you and I probably both started playing the EX series, um, which several weeks from now we're going to talk about and how crazy things got during that.
Yeah, and the kind of
But
the reasons why they changed the way they did too, and that'll be an interesting discussion because that is my favorite era of Pokemon cards, mostly because of nostalgia. But they have a lot of interesting things going on during the third generation, during the EX series of Pokemon.
so according to Pokemon right now, or according to TCG Play right now, there's 23,000 unique base set cards for sale on TCG Player, which is, and they range anywhere from damage condition all the way to near mint. 108 cards in the set, and it breaks down as 38 commons, 32 uncommons, 16 rare, 15 holo rare. There was, I believe, 2 theme decks, maybe just 1 theme deck for this one. 4 different pack artworks. You had, I believe it was Charizard, Venusaur, Blastoise.
I believe it was just 3.
Is it just 3?
It was just 3 for the first one. Everything else, almost everything else past that was 4. But the first one was 3. It was just the final evolutions of the starters.
Can we talk about how Venusaur never gets love, like, ever? Like, if you think about all the retrains like Charizard and Blastoise have had, like Charizard and Delta Species, for example, had the lightning metal type, which was awesome, and then Blastoise had a weird like fire metal type. Venusaur nowhere to be seen. It took Venusaur 29 years to get a shiny printing, because its first one was the Radiant Venusaur in Pokemon Go, which I am so happy we finally got one. He's such a good little turtle, onion boy, whatever you want to call him. But really, Pokemon Red and Blue got released in English, but Pokemon Green didn't. Like, they skipped Pokemon Green entirely, and they're like, what if we just give this weird electric mouse its own video game? So shout out to my boy Venusaur, never getting the love he deserves. When you think of base set, or at least when I think of base set, the first thing that always comes to my mind is like, how did this start? What was the big thing that really got this going? So the first trading card game, Magic, comes out in 1992. And it releases at Gen Con in Indianapolis. And then they released their first set alpha January of 93. It is 2 years later when Pokemon International, owned by their printing rights owned by Wizards of the Coast, who was also printing Magic at the time, starts printing Pokemon cards. And man, I don't know if it caught on as quickly as Magic did, because Magic really took off pretty quickly. But its first, it really caught on, I think, at 96, 97 here in the United States. Like I said, I wasn't even born. I was born in 1998. So I have no recollection of these cards other than my cousins growing up who were all older than me. They all had multiple copies of these cards and probably have no idea where they're at now, but they're probably worth thousands of dollars, knowing some of how they took care of the cards. Do you have any recollection of playing with base set cards at all, or anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I have my own cards now. I don't even know where I got them from, I'll be honest. They could have just came from a random garage sale where I'm like, oh, here's a bucket of Pokemon cards, let's take these. Or, maybe I did have a couple of friends actually before I moved to where I met you that gave me a few cards to get me started. And I had some that way, and I just guess I gained some throughout my years of collecting. And so I remember I have cards, But do I ever remember opening a pack? Absolutely not, because I don't think my first pack of Pokemon cards was until like midway through the EX series. So I recollection of opening, no. But do I have them? Yes. Where did they come from? I don't know. Maybe out of thin air. But I do in fact have them. So where's that?
I think it's crazy. I have tons of base set cards, but I've never opened a single pack of base set. Usually I pick through bulk bins at like local game stores, and if they have older cards, I'll just pick them up. I just like the way they look. I like the way
Mm-hmm.
they feel. And it's always cool to have like a collector's piece. Be like, look, these are older than me, kids. Like, in the future. But it's so funny how like everybody has this mind that like everything in like base set is so rare, but like I'm still able to go pick up Charmanders, like Pikachu's, even like Squirtles, Bulbasaur's, all that for pennies on the dollar from my LGS because they just have so much of it laying around.
Yeah, they print out a lot of stuff during base set, and where it kind of went down was during the second generation, towards the end. I mean, you look at some of those like end of the line Wizards of the Coast cards when they stopped printing them at the end of Gen 2. And I mean, just some of those commons go for an obscene amount, like much more than base set. So you're right when you say that. When base set, it seems older and people have this nostalgia towards it. But it's, in all honesty, unless you get to like the hollows, I mean, they don't get too expensive unless we're looking like first edition maybe, but that unlimited print, yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to attain there.
Even a lot of the first edition stuff, you're not talking about like the big three,
Mm-hmm.
Charizard, Venusaur, Blastoise. You know, I picked up a first edition like near mint Machamp Hollow for $15 the other day. Like I also bought a Skyridge Snorlax near mint, and it was like $18. And Snorlax was a common in that set.
Mm.
That's like the kind of crazy thing we're talking about when we're alluding to like the big changes here. Like, everybody talks about how base sets, probably the most expensive set and everything, but like if you look at those late E series, Skyridge, Acropolis, like oh man, like good luck finding sealed packs, but also good luck finding anything for under $1,000 from those. Um, Base set, you can still get base set packs for 200-300 bucks usually. So that's enough about opening the cards because I think a lot of them have already been opened. Let's talk about the cards themselves.
Absolutely.
Um, the first Pokemon card official tournament, there was a report put in the Pokemon Card Fan Club Volume 2, which was a magazine that was distributed in Japan. The first event was held June 14th and 15th in 1997 at the Mess Event Hall in Chiba, Japan. And it was at the Next Generation World Hobby Fair. And this was a tournament where they gave away 3 Pokemon trophy cards. There was the number 1 trainer, number 2 trainer, number 3 trainer, and they had 2 separate major events. Now, if you go to a Pokemon event nowadays, they divide this into 3 age groups. So Austin and I compete in the Masters division, even though I would say I probably would get beat by most juniors. Um, but it's just because we're so old. Then you have the seniors division, which is mostly like your middle school and high school age kids. They compete for scholarships and things like that. And then you have juniors, which is probably my favorite if I ever had to pick to judge, because like it's these little like 4 and 5 year old kids who usually like some might actually have competitive decks, but a lot of them you'll see with just like the random piles of commons they picked up
Mm-hmm.
with the help of their parents. It's always really cool. But nowadays, again, it's divided up. But this one was not divided up. It was everybody for themselves. And the first day, the morning session, June 14th, the person who wins, 22-year-old Wataru Aoshi. I hope I'm not pronouncing that wrong, but I probably am. Only has like 3 base set cards. Like it has a super energy retrieval, has an item finder, has a computer search, and an Electabuzz. Everything else was non-base set. And then you go to the afternoon session. You get a Dratini, you get the base set Clefairy, and then there's like computer search, super energy removal, and then super energy retrieval. And then this was back in the day where trainer cards weren't like super heavily used. But the very next morning, a 14-year-old Japanese player, Tatsuro Ikashi, shows up and he's playing 3 super energy removals, 3 scoop ups, 3 Pokemon Center, 3 Defender, 1 Devolution Spray. This is really the first person to be like, oh, I can just play more of these effects, find them more often, and my deck is just this much better. Absolutely crazy. And then his only base set Pokemon themselves, Abracadabra, Alakazam, in this deck. What I think sticks out to me is like this was so close to being a failed product because there wasn't good balance. That's really the first thing that sticks out to me. Could you imagine if energy removal existed in modern Pokemon?
For absolutely nothing, no. That would be crazy. Because I mean, the closest thing, and I'll pull that up here. The closest thing that we have to this energy removal, which is choose one energy card attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon, discard it. It's not just the active Pokemon, your opponent's active Pokemon, not a bench. Any Pokemon, and for absolutely nothing. The closest thing that we have to that is the Crushing Hammer, which is flip a coin if has discarded energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So at least you have to do something for that. You're taking a gamble. In which case, in the older sets, like I just said, the energy removal, I mean, just absolutely free. It's like, oh, I see you got a few energies there, and you just take them off. And one thing about the trainer cards back in Generation 1, you could use as many trainer cards per turn as you wanted. So, I mean, if you get Professor Oak, and now this would not be a viable strategy back in the day, and I can go into that later. But if you use Professor Oak right away, you got rid of your hand, got 7 new cards. Oh, hey, this hand sucks, but I did get another Professor Oak. Use it again, and then boom, 7 more cards. You could just like go through your deck like that if you wanted. There was no limit on that stuff. So you could use as many of those as you wanted. And if you think of modern day supporter cards, think about that. But if you got to use them like unlimited, the TCG would go nuts. I don't even know where expanded would be. It'd be more like of a mind hell than it already is. So I mean, it's just one of the many crazy things about the early competitive viability of the trading card game.
There's a card in Magic called Wheel of Fortune, which is the same thing as Professor Oak. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. It is banned in pretty much every format because, like, just the art of like getting to draw 7 new cards is absurd. Pot of Greed, which is the same thing as Bill. For those who are Yu-Gi-Oh fans, Pot of Greed literally says draw 2 cards. Bill says draw 2 cards. Pot of Greed is banned in Yu-Gi-Oh, and they've made 50,000 retrains of Pot of Greed, and each one is just as broken as Pot of Greed because drawing 2 cards is absurd, you know? And the fact that you didn't have to use your resources to like churn and burn through your deck like you do nowadays, where you really have to, have I played a supporter this turn? Have I done this? Have I done that? Keep track of your abilities. Like modern day Pokemon absolutely would be bonkers if they didn't separate things into types. Like I don't even know how I don't want to know what expanded would look like. Probably because like the deck I play in expanded, Lost March and Night March, and even dabble into like Mad Party, would be able to like win every game on turn 1 because I get to go, 4 copies of Professor's Research on my first turn. So yeah, I mean, there were some crazy powerful cards in here. But it was so unbalanced with the sets that would follow that Pokemon almost died before it really got off the ground. If you look at, the order, you go from base set, and then, there's a small little gap, but then you go base set into jungle into fossil. The power level difference between those is crazy. Um, it and it's like that with every game. I think your first couple of sets are usually okay. Are we doing this well? What can we do better? And for me, this was one of those things where it was like, okay, like they have the game established, they have these ideas of what they want to do. Now it's time to figure out how to really make this a cohesive game. And thank God, we're 28 years later, and they did a really good job at this, obviously, because we're still playing it, and it's the second most popular TCG in the world, and closing in on Magic very quickly.
Yeah, and if unless you want to say something else about that, I actually want to do a little bit of a look into kind of what the competitive aspect of it looked during the very first sets. Like, this is before we added it in Jungle, and this is some of this is kind of speculation, but like what the most powerful decks would be using, or what they did use back when it was just base set. So when people were just trying things out, before, like you said, before there was even tournaments, people were trying things out. One of the first ones on that, and one like a really iconic deck, is the deck called Haymaker. It's an iconic deck. It's a top deck of the time and created a lot of problems. And one thing that, and I'm using a website called jkletspokemon.com, and it kind of goes through some of the older cards and the older formats and kind of gives a little insight about what they're all about. So this Haymaker deck focuses in around the card Hitmonchan. So you'll see that up here if you are watching on our live stream. That's going to be, if you look at this card today, it's Hitmonchan, a basic Pokemon with 70 HP. For 1 fighting energy, it does 20 damage, and for 2 fighting energies and a colorless, it does 40. Now, Zach, I'm not sure what your opinions on that, if it were to exist today as a high-end staple of Pokemon cards for the competitive game, but it just, with how much HP has grown, the inflation of that, if you will, it would not look very good today. But back when HP was a lot lower, and it was just harder to keep Pokemon in, these lower numbers still looked relatively high. So that 70 HP basic Pokemon you see there was actually doing pretty decent, and for a quick 20 damage for 1 fighting energy, that wasn't a bad option to go with, especially when you had a lot of electric type Pokemon out there who could take some weakness and die in one shot.
Yeah, really, like if you think about it, even a couple years ago when they re-released everything with like a more modern update, like they still had to update the attacks. 90 HP, 30 for jab, 90 for special punch. This, wasn't a competitive card at all when it comes out, right? Because we've moved on to where, I mean, realistically, like none of these cards from back then would still be able to be played. But that was one of the big things that stuck out to me, was like even the retrains of these cards don't see play at all.
Yeah, and so that one got a reprint, obviously. And that was in Evolutions, XY Evolutions. Same thing with the Electabuzz that also went into the Haymaker deck to also go along with Hitmonchan. And the big reason that Electabuzz came into play was because of Farfetch'd, which was able to have a resistance of -30, which is a lot for that day. I mean, take a look at the Hitmonchan here. With a special punch of 40, -30, you're only doing 10 damage for 3 energies. So that's when Electabuzz came into this. So that was kind of one of the first big counter plays, was throwing in some Electabuzz to counter Farfetch'd, which countered the Hitmonchan. So just a few more cards that we'll look at just based on the Pokemon. Even in this Haymaker deck, Farfetch'd, there was a few of those in there to counter other Haymaker decks. A couple Doduas to maybe balance out some more Haymaker cards, and Chansey. That was flip a coin. If heads, prevent all damage done to Chansey during your opponent's next turn. So if you need to stall a little bit, you could do that as well. And since it is a colorless Pokemon, it could use the double colorless energy, which we talked about earlier. And that's been a staple in the card game ever since. So it provides 2 colorless energies, if you don't know. And so that's like attaching 2 energies in the turn instead of 1. And in a format in base set where you couldn't attach extra energies unless you were playing Blastoise, then that was a pretty fast way to get attacks out if need be. So that kind of wraps up the Pokemon of that, but then there's also some trainers that go into that as well, unless Zach has anything else to say about that Pokemon lineup for Haymaker.
I will say, I think it's hilarious that WotC messed up when they were reprinting Hitmonchan as a promo. They gave it 60 HP instead of 70 HP. So the promo, which was given to winners of local events in 1998 and 1999, or second place finishers, got a card that they really couldn't play in their deck because it was worse than the one you could just get in the base set packs. And at the time, of course, base set cards weren't astronomically expensive. And even now, this one's not really that expensive either. But I always found that funny that like one little mess up in their editing honestly like made a lot of players very upset because they have this promo that's basically useless for them.
And back in that day, 10 HP was quite a bit more than it is today. That would still make a difference. Even recently when the Lost Box came out with Sableye and Comfey, some players would switch their Sobbles from the 60 HP from the 60 HP Rapid Strike one to 70 HP, just because you would need an extra 10 damage. So if 10 HP makes a difference now, it would have definitely made a difference back in that day. So that it really did make it that much less unviable to play.
Yeah, and then other than that, we're talking about this Haymaker deck. There's so many cool, even nowadays, like I think you could really break it down to where there are Haymaker decks and there are like just like those kind of off the wall deck things like that we have now. They just don't have the same nicknames and titles like that.
Absolutely. And I always like looking back at these old decks and seeing what kind of names they come up with, because I think they're just fun. And you'll see some of those today, but it's usually just like the name of the attack or the name of the Pokemon. But it kind of really depends. One example I thought in my head was like Mega Ray. Like, I wonder what that deck's about. Back when that was really popular during the end of the X and Y era. Really, really good deck there, but just Mega Ray. Like, it's so boring. Moving on to the trainers of the deck. So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with like the use as many as you want during a turn. Running 4 bills, so that's 8 cards that you can draw from that in a turn, if theoretically. 4 Professor's Oaks, 4 energy removal, 3 Gust of Wind. I know we haven't talked about that one, so let me pull up Gust of Wind here. This is kind of a busted card when you really get talking about it. Choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with one of his or her active Pokemon for absolutely nothing. If we were to look at the relevant card today that it follows, it would follow up with the Lysander that we saw in XY Flashfire and so on, and that we now have as Boss's Orders. And that's a supporter card. You can use 1 per turn, as opposed to Gust of Wind, which was basically an item card, and you could use that as many times as you wanted, with no worry about using up another supporter. So no flipping of coins like a Pokemon catcher, just gust of wind. It's up. There you go. See, we also have Scoop Up. Choose one of your own Pokemon in play and return it to your hand, which is kind of similar to, like, recently we've been using Scoop Up Net. So unless your Pokemon is a V or GX, then you can just put that right into your hand. And we saw a lot of that with the Sobble line, to get that back in your hand and, you know, redo the abilities. So you could just do that anytime you want back in the old format. Let's see. Item Finder, which is, I know, a card that Zach likes as well. Another really good card, Item Finder here. Discard 2 of the other cards from your hand in order to put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. So get back any of the other cards we're talking about now. Super Energy Removal, which is discard 1 energy card attached to one of your own Pokemon in order to choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and up to 2 energy cards attached to it. So 1 away from you, but 2 away from your opponent. So that could really get them disrupted, especially if you would be running like some sort of mill deck. And then 2 plus powers and 2 Lass. And Lass is also an interesting card in the last trainer card I'll talk about. And that is... don't have that one up here. So Lass is you and your opponent show each other your hands. Then shuffle all the trainer cards from your hands into your deck. So you'd kind of really want to be using those unless you wanted to get them last away. So that's kind of like what a trainer outlook would look like on an older deck. Thinking optimally. So, any thoughts on those trainers, Zach?
We're going to talk about this, about how broken the energy removal is. But I don't think people like nowadays could even fathom how disruptive it is if you're like on the draw, like you're the second person to go, and your opponent's able to go like double edge on Chansey because they have 2 double colorless energies, and then also bounce your energy to the graveyard. That is so brutal. I mean, 80 hit points, Chansey does damage to itself. Pretty powerful back in the day already. With the help of DCE, you can use it as early as turn 2. But it is crazy to me that was like okay back, like they were like, oh yeah, you know what, this game needs resource denial, which is one of the main reasons people quit Magic the Gathering, is resource denial. They don't like playing against it, which is so funny to me. But yeah, 100%, like, cannot believe just how broken that was, and still would be if they were like, you know what, just for fun, you guys can have a little taste of what it's like to have super energy removal or superior energy retrieval or any of those effects in expanded or standard. Pokemon would probably kill itself overnight. So yeah, that's honestly the best way to describe like this early format. Like if you were playing energy denial, you probably weren't winning.
Yeah, and one of the big things that we can pull out of that too, and why in this deck it runs 9 fighting energy, 7 lightning energy, and 2 double colorless energy, is that getting cards out of your discard pile was a lot harder back in the day. You didn't have cards that could say, unless you're using Item Finder, and that only applies to trainers. So that's a little bit earlier I was talking about how if you use Professor Oak, you were kind of taking more of a gamble than you would today. Today you have cards that would allow you to just pull Pokemon, energy, really, anything out of the discard pile. But back in the day, you had to be a little bit more conservative when it came to using your Professor Oaks. Now, was it good to have them, and that's why they had 4 in their decks? Yes, absolutely. but you had to be a little bit more careful when you had those, and use those. So it was a little bit more strategically evolved with those cards, but they were still definitely good, especially if you only had like 1 or 2 cards left in your hand, to get a whole new hand. And if you needed to do it again in the same turn, well, then there you go. You got another hand for free too. After you used up all the other 6 trainer cards in your hand there.
When do you think the last era was when like you could just play a base set deck against them and win? Because like I look at some of these cards, especially if you were playing by base set rules where I can use every card in my hand as many times as I want, basically. You know, like Lass and Professor Oak, they're not supporters. Bill's not a supporter, right? I have a feeling that probably not recently, not Sun and Moon era, not Sword and Shield era, and probably not X and Y era. But I think during Black and White era, a deck like this featuring Hitmonchan, Electabuzz, like the Farfetch'd Doduo Chansey, all that, and then probably going up to the 4 double colorless energies and like cutting, 1 each fighting and lightning would probably be very, very good in standard. Like just being able to play 4 energy removals and having no downside to it, being able to scoop up your basic Pokemon whenever you feel like it. Energy retrieval has always been like a relatively good resource card. Item finder doesn't really exist nowadays because they don't want people reusing all the same trainers over and over again. And even like super energy removal, which you could easily bump up to 4 at the cost of the 2+ powers. Like I think that would actually be like pretty damn good in Black White era. But XY era I think is probably the cutoff. Do you think that maybe if you were to build a different deck, like with base set cards, you could potentially beat a Sun and Moon or Sword and Shield era deck?
I don't think in Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, even Black and White is still kind of weird, just because that's when they were starting to use more of the EX cards, which should be basic. So I think at that point I would still say no. It's still a little bit more believable than Sword and Shield and Sun Moon XY. But I'd probably go back to say Generation 4 is when we could probably start seeing it still be relevant.
I think Gen 4 you're probably rolling through them. I think like if you're able to, and again, this is all based on like who's on the play, who's on the draw, how that all breaks down. I really think like you could just roll through just about anybody in Gen 4 because, the best decks in Generation 4, which we're going to talk about several weeks from now, if you guys keep up with us, we're using these level X Pokemon and even the evolution-based EX Pokemon right at the beginning of the format. And they weren't like huge yet. The Regigigas level X, 150 hit points. The biggest card to this point was a 200 hit point Wailord EX, but again, takes them 2 turns to get there. The attacks take forever to get off. Like, other than a few of the broken, and when I say broken, I mean absurd cards that came out later, really, I think the formats would have been perfectly fine.
Yeah, it is just kind of interesting how it worked out. And I think, thinking on it, I think 2003 was the last time we were able to use base set cards in tournaments. So they actually lasted for quite a while. If for Japan, I believe it was 1997 when the 96 or 97 when the they actually got rolling with the card sets. Let me double check my work on that. Okay, yeah. October 20th of 1996 for Japan and January 9th, 1999 for English for base set. They could use that up until 2003, their base set cards, as part of the standard format. So that actually lasted quite a little bit, up until the beginning of the Ruby and Sapphire era, the EX era of cards. So they were just able to use that. Now, I can't remember for sure. I'm not sure if they ever put any eras on the any of the cards, but I know that you were able to use some of these cards up until that point. So they did last a while, and I know they were pretty good. And we'll look at those as we get into some other decks later on. But just looking at strictly base set, this is still a really good arsenal to have, and why it dominated Haymaker did so early on in the format, with just all these absolutely busted cards. Just last in particular, just if you go first and you want to get rid of your opponent's hand of trainers, then boom, you throw out a last. If you are pretty well set up, because it also takes your cards and puts them in your deck. But I mean, if you're pretty well set up, I mean, who's gonna stop you if they don't have any trainer cards to get rolling themselves? So that's also another reason why people had to run so many trainers, is because they could just as easily run out of trainer cards as well. So that's kind of Haymaker in a nutshell, and why it was so effective back in the days that it was alive and well.
Yeah, and again, we're getting to the point where we're talking about a lot of like different cards here. I think there's a lot to go undervalued here, but I want to just kind of skim through the next couple of decks here before we get to our awards section. So the next probably tier 2 deck of the format would have been like your Buzz Zapdos, which was given to you by kind of this. Your goal is to have your electrodes knocked out, put them onto Zapdos from base set, and then use cards like use attacks like Thunder and Thunderbolt to basically OHKO your opponent, one-hit KO your opponents. And again, you're focusing on cards like Plus Power and Defender to keep your things alive, Scoop Up, Full Heal, Gust of Wind, all that fun stuff. We've seen Electrode have this ability multiple times over the years. If it's knocked out, or you can choose to knock it out and you attach it as an energy, or you knock it out and you search for 5 energies or whatever. Why does this design always work? Like, it seems like every time Electrode comes out like this, it's always relatively busted.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea, and one thing about this that makes it so interesting, along with the Pokemon games as well, is just how it relates to the games. The Pokemon Company does a pretty good job of relating the cards that they make to the games. Like Electric Shock, not an actual like attack used in the games, but you will see instances where they use attacks on the cards that are from the games. Or if they're not from the games, well, then they're certainly at least related to the Pokemon. So Pokemon definitely does a really, really good job of making sure that the cards that they have and put out relate somehow to the Pokemon's design and to the card game in itself. So in this case, Electrode, it's kind of like, it uses like Explosion Law. That's what it's known for. Self-destruct. It's kind of like that. It's releasing that energy onto another Pokemon. So I think that's kind of the rationale when they use that. And yes, like Zach said, it has worked for a lot of different formats. Even recently, and when I traveled to Baltimore for the regionals, and then Indianapolis, the one before, no, it was the one after, because I used Mew at Indianapolis. Milwaukee, there we go. I was using a variation on Dialga V-Star, and that used the Electrode V, or not Electrode. I was thinking. Sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. Expanded, what I like to do. Here we go. Expanded. This is Giratina and Garchomp GX tag team. You can use Electrode's ability to knock it out. Your opponent gets 2 prize cards, but you do get to attach 5 special energies from your discard onto a Pokemon. And for me, that would go to my Dialga V-Star. So, same card, just an expanded format. Use the timeless attack, attack, the V-Star attack to take another turn, transfer all those energies, attach 1 more to Giratina, and knock out the 2 other Pokemon for the win. It's pretty busted, and that's just another way, like Zach was saying, that Electrode took what it originally did in the base set and has continuously applied it to the cards that we have today. And we'll see that in a lot of other cards too, eventually when we talk about computer search, as just one example of things that carry over to today's game.
Naturally, of course, that's a good sign of a healthy created game. A healthily created game, you want to be able to reuse some of your original designs, because I think that that just shows how powerful, or how well designed these things are. The next deck focuses on using Alakazam and Machamp, two stage 2 Pokemon, and you never attack with Alakazam, but you use its ability damage swap, which is essentially, as often as you would like, you can take damage counters from one Pokemon you control and move it to another. The other main attacker in this deck is Chansey. Again, that double-edge attack, 80 damage, 80 to itself. Very powerful with a 120 hit point Pokemon. Again, we've seen retrains of this effect before. This deck would not be competitive at all beyond probably, the final years of Fossil Standard, because I just don't think stage 2s were as viable back in the day until when they brought out Rare Candy, which is an item that comes out much later in the game. And then the last deck that we really should highlight was the Rain Dance Blastoise deck. This card has been retrained on multiple Pokemon over the years. Blastoise has had it a few times. Most recently, I believe it's Frostmoth that has had it. The Rain Dance ability, as often as you'd like, attach a water energy to one of your water Pokemon. And it doesn't use your energy attachment for turn. Fun fact, that's pretty darn good. Anything you can do to ramp out your energy like this and magic, it's the same thing. Anytime you can just bring out more resources than your opponent is crazy. The two main attackers, of course, the Hydro Pump Blastoise, which also has the Rain Dance ability, 40 damage plus 10 more for each water energy attached. Extra energy after the second one doesn't count, so I think you can max out at 60 unless you use like plus power. And then the Gyarados from base set, Dragon Rage, 50 damage, and then Bubble Beam, 40 damage. Flip a coin if heads, Pokemon is not paralyzed. I love how Gyarados is called the atrocious Pokemon. Because really, I mean, if we're going to be real, Magikarp is the atrocious Pokemon because it's terrible in the games. But it's so awesome to me that this, we're finally able to kind of go through this history. And we got some awards to hand out. Unless you want to chime in on some of these decks here.
One last thing I will chime in on, I kind of want to go back and talk about, is you mentioned Rare Candy earlier, which choose one of your basic Pokemon in play if you have a stage 2 of that card, blah, 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 blah. That was an item card, that came out a lot later in the game. I think Generation 3 and Fire Red and Leaf Green, maybe, somewhere around that era. But we did actually have, in base set, Pokemon Breeder, which it seems like a supporter, but it was essentially just the precursor to the Rare Candy, which is what made these decks a little bit more viable. Put a stage 2 evolution card from your hand onto the matching basic Pokemon. You can only play this card when you would be allowed to evolve that Pokemon anyway. Now, the wording is a little bit more odd back in our older cards. They didn't really have a set way that they were going to word that out yet. They're just getting things out for the sake of getting things out. But that was kind of the precursor to Rare Candy and what we see today. So I don't know why they ended up getting rid of it. Maybe because it seemed like a supporter and they didn't want to make it a supporter. But Pokemon Breeder was essentially the precursor to the modern day Rare Candy. So that's why we see that in the the Machamp and Alakazam deck, where we have 4 Abra, 2 Kadabra, and 3 Alakazam, just something that you would see in modern day in evolution decks, is where you generally see less of the middle evolution. Now, you still obviously have them in case you don't have the cards that they're prized. Or if we look at 4 Squirtle, 1 Wartortle, and 3 Blastoise, same thing, because it runs 4 Pokemon breeders. So it still has to be in your hand, so it doesn't like let you search through. That would be absolutely busted. Like, search your deck for a Pokemon to evolve, like with a rare candy. That'd be nuts. So this one is actually pretty tame. It just wasn't called rare candy back in the day. So we did in fact have something like that helped those decks move through a little bit more.
Let's pass out some awards, shall we, to wrap up this first pilot episode. And when coming up with awards for this, there's really a few I wanted to highlight. Best artwork was a big one, because I think a lot of this art is very simple, yet some of it really pops. And then we had best rare, best non-rare, worst rare, cards that define the set, and then also talking about the most influential or best trainer card. So let's start with the worst rare in the set. Because I think that this is there's a lot of ways that this could go. And for worst rare, I'm going to include both the holo rares and normal rares in this selection. And I'll go ahead and give mine first. My vote is actually going to be Clefairy. 40 HP, has Sing, and it has Metronome. The worst part about it is how weak it is overall. Its weakness to fighting type. I don't know. There probably is something as bad or worse, but to me, this feels like the worst card that came out at this time.
Especially when you think about Haymaker. I mean, you're not going to throw this bitch on Haymaker. Like, that's 1 energy and you're done. Like, that's...
Yeah, I mean, you literally, like, you might get off a Sing, if you're going second, and if not, like, they are literally going to jab you to death with their Hitmonchan. And I just think, like, the fighting types at the time, there were so many of them that were just so good. Looking at Dugtrio, looking at what comes later with like the Machoke lines and things like that, it's pretty tough, I would say, to say that this thing would last very long. And really, its only saving grace is its resistance to, in this case, Ghost type, a Psychic type. And even then, that's not really something, in my opinion, that saves it well enough.
Another thing, quick rules, I had to re-look this one up. Player going first in Wizards of the Coast era can attack.
Oh yeah, then you're done. You're not ever. No, that's it.
Clefairy will not see the light of day. So if you're, it just wasn't a good time. So it was really interesting how that works. So I mean, that was one of the other.
And like, Machoke was an uncommon in this set. Mm-hmm. And even like if you're like, oh, I can probably live through a Machoke fight, it has double the health, and its attacks are so much better than Metronome, and maybe putting something to sleep.
Yeah, it was not a good combination. Clefairy, at least for like the very first base set, did not work out too well. Now there was a deck, and we'll explore that when we get to some more sets that did involve Clefairy and Clefable. But strictly speaking, for base set, Clefairy was not good. Even with the Metronome attack, it was really not a viable option when there were so many better rares out in the set. And I'll give my award for the worst rare, in my opinion. And I'm going to give that to the Beedrill regular rare. This is a stage 2. So it took a while to get out. It had 80 HP, which is alright, but that's, once again, only 10 more than our Hitmonchan friend there. It did have that resistance to fighting, so it did have that going on in the early day. But its first attack is Twin Needle for 3 colorless energy. Flip 2 coins. This attack does 30 damage times the number of heads. So, I mean, you could count on 30, but why would you do that when you could just go for literally any other, like, better card in the, like, in base set? It really just doesn't do that much, and then there's a chance you could just get 0 flop, and somehow, some way, you're going to get haymakered. And there's also Poison Sting for 3 grass energy, which is going to take longer since you can't even use double colorless on it. So that's one argument you could have made for Twin Needles, like, oh, you have double colorless. Well, yes, but then you might not also get your other attack, which takes 3 grass energy for 40 damage. And then once again, we're flipping a coin to see if the defending Pokemon is poisoned. Now, if you do happen to land all your heads, you got your weighted dice on you, you're good to go, okay? So maybe Beedrill isn't too bad in that instance, but I just don't see Beedrill being too good of an option. Also, the art on it, it looks ugly, so I'm playing that for a small part of it too.
Other than the art, I actually think this card's pretty good. Free retreat cost is busted. Being able to just pivot it around the board as much or as often as you need to every turn is insane. Clefairy still makes you retreat with an energy. That was my argument for that. But I will say, as far as the stage 2s go in the set, it is obviously one of the weaker, which overlaps with the video games quite a bit. It's one of the weaker stage 2s you can use in some of the earlier games. There were some other ones. I had people tell me, I had friends say, Imposter Professor Oak.
Okay, yeah.
That's an option. I think I would argue that, like, this is a game where, like, oftentimes your hands are pretty clunky, so you're gonna have more than 7 cards in your hand. Being able to fix them to 7, or maybe you think your opponent has the card that they need, you can force them to shuffle their hand back. It's probably close to second to last or last, but I will still give the edge to Clefairy, because I think even Clefairy's doll, or Clefairy doll, is better. So that's, it's kind of crazy, because like Clefairy doll is literally just a 10 hit point thing, but your opponent does not take a prize card for knocking it out, which I think is like such a tempo swing if your opponent has to swing into it anyway. That's part of the reason why I'm pretty high on it. Next award here, and I'll let you start with this one, but I would love to get your opinion of the best rare in the set.
The best rare in this set. I'm going to start off actually with an honorable mention first before I get to it. And that one has to go to the Blastoise that we discussed earlier. The Rain Dance Blastoise. Just like similar to Ice Dance from Frostmoth as we see it today. Or Deluge Blastoise, which came later. Just allowing you to get so many water energy on your board. Especially if you can get some Professor's research is going, you can possibly get a lot of energy out really quickly if you can get that Blastoise out. But that is not the best rare in my opinion, just at least in terms of the viability of it. I have to go with Hitmonchan with how dominant it was during its era, during its reign of terror in early meta Pokemon TCG. So I'm going to go with Hitmonchan for my best rare of the set, just due to its competitive viability during early game.
Hitmonchan, I think, would be third on my list, because I think a lot of the hollows are just, they require too much to attack. That being said, My honorable mention, the second place for me, is going to be computer search. Being able to search your deck for anything in any game is broken. Fun fact. Imagine if you're playing euchre with your friends and you're able to be like swap out a couple cards in your hand to sit out a trick, but you can go get the jack of clubs, you know, or you like in Magic, for example, there's a card called Demonic Tutor. Requires the use of 2 mana to search out any card. It is banned in every format except for one where it's restricted, where you can use one of them. And since then, they've made it a four turn casting cost card. So computer search, honorable mention, second place for me. But I think overall it's item finder. This card, discard 2 cards from your hand to put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. It's such a tempo swing, such a like. It really is just one of those cards where I don't think they can put it back into standard Pokemon. They have tried to like bring it back a few times or cards similar to it. They have a similar effect, but essentially what this says is any trainer in the game, and nowadays that would mean your stadiums, your supporters, your items, your tools. I think it would just be way too good in a modern sense. But yeah, I do like the Hitmonchan pick as well. I think that that's a excellent choice as well. Let's go with the best non-rare card. This could be a common or uncommon from this set. And this was a runaway for me. There was one card and one card only I was thinking of the whole time while doing this. There's probably some I'm not thinking of. But it's double colorless energy. It's consistently just been the most broken like energy card in standard every time it gets reprinted.
Mm-hmm. And I, on that hand, will also go with double colorless energy. I don't feel like I need to reiterate what you just said. So I do also want to point out another card that, contrary to what I said earlier about the Hitmonchan being competitively viable in this format and why I chose it for that, I want to give an honorable mention to how it played out later, was the Raticate from base set. Back in the day, I don't think it really mattered quite as much, but with the Super Fang attack, it does damage to the defending Pokemon equal to half the defending's Pokemon remaining HP. This would later be used as a basis to get your opponent's Pokemon down to 10. And we would see cards like that used in the X and Y era with Raticate Break decks coming out. Where they would, use something that would get you poisoned, and use Eradicate to get you down to 10 HP and then kill you. So you get some prize cards for that, all for a 1 prize card Pokemon. So that did run a little rampant for a little bit there, and has seen some play since then. So I did want to shout out to that Eradicate there. Not really good back in its format, but it did have some implications later on that would make it, at least see some more play. And I didn't really think there was too much going on in terms of outside of trainers, because I kind of thought of those in their own separate world. If I was going just based off the Pokemon, I would probably put Raticate up there. But we did agree on double colorless energy for being such an outstanding card, and it's been reprinted so many times and used so much, and I can't recommend that card enough unless someone has a special discard energy.
Yeah, like an enhanced hammer or something.
Something like that.
The only other card I could really think of that would be like pretty bonkers. I do remember the Haunter from base set being relatively unstoppable for times. Again, the weakness of Hitmonchan. It also resists Hitmonchan, but the Hypnosis into Dream Eater 1-2 punch was really powerful. And then there's, of course, Professor Oak, discard your hand, draw 7 cards. A staple in every Pokemon format. It gets retrained in. Whether it's current standard, where I think everybody's just playing Professor's Research, expanded, which is also again Professor's Research dominated. It is a very, very powerful card. So, but again, it's double colorless energy, and it really doesn't feel super close. But I could totally see arguments. Let's talk about the best trainer. I'll let you pick first here. What would your best trainer award be?
Definitely, and it was one of your picks for your rares. I have to give that to the computer search, and just to like not make it to what you're talking about earlier, and how it got reprinted later is, you know, this card is obviously so good. You can get any card from your deck, which can come in super clutch. One way we saw it later on in the format was when they printed computer search as an ace spec card. In the later black and white era. And with the A-Spec card, you can only have one A-Spec card in your whole hand. Now, it is an item, so you can use it whenever you want without using your supporter, but you can only use one A-Spec card in your deck. And we'll talk about that more when we get to our black and white sets later on. But it has basically the same thing. Discard 2 cards from your hand, search your deck for a card and put it in your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. I mean, that's just such a busted a card. And they realized that later on, which is why they printed it as an A-Spec. And I think they did a similar thing with the item finder. And I'm trying to remember what that one was called.
I believe it's called Dowsing Machine.
Dowsing Machine, yes. So
Yes.
Dowsing Machine was printed as an A-Spec as well. So, you know, they kind of found their roots in the base set Pokemon card game and said, well, that was busted. All right, so maybe we fucked up a little bit. But let's see if we can't try to use it again. And that's where I think A-Specs came from part of the time. And then there's also Life Dew, which I'm sure we'll talk about later because it's one of my favorite cards of all time. But that wasn't based on a card that we found here because we didn't have tool cards now like we do here in the future. So I'm going to go with computer search for my best trainer.
Yeah, so the A specs, all of them were basically retrains of old cards. Like it's Scoop Up Cyclone is, you know, essentially a retrain of the Scoop Up card. I always found it funny. Side note: Master Ball, the actual card, horrible. Doesn't do anything really. It's a pretty terrible card, in fact. But the A spec is actually a Master Ball, which is what it's supposed to be. I am going to give it again best trainer to computer search. I gave best rare to item finder. I don't like things having multiple of the same awards. But I think computer search, especially like thinking about what computer search does now, pretty bonkers. And I know item finder was used a lot more back in the day because you were able to go through your hands so much faster than using computer search. But I'm sure decks would make use of both of them if they were legal today. Let's talk about the best art. I kind of hinted on this earlier. A lot of art in base set is very basic. Not a lot going on. But there are a few that I think we should definitely highlight. So go ahead. What would you say your best art is?
My favorite art from base set is definitely, without a doubt, the regular rare Dragonair. So if you're looking at it on my stream here, if you're looking at it later on, just search it on up. It just it is so cool. I mean, the beautiful art of just a Dragonair is something, and it's like, it's reflective, it's shiny. I like that. I think they put in some good work for the like what looks like watercolors there to start off. But then the aurora in the back with the stars going on, I like that a lot. And we didn't always see that in some of those earlier cards. They just had some like background with like fire or something. But this one had like Dragonair swimming in water. There's some ice back there with an aurora going on. I love the art so much. It is definitely my favorite. But I do also want to point out to Ghastly, which I think has an interesting art. little bit more basic. It just hanging out somewhere with that classic oh, sorry, that one's not Ken Sugimori. My bad. But it is just a very iconic looking card. I have one somewhere near me that's like ripped up in half. I don't know why it's ripped up in half, but I've always had it there. And just some cool writing on the back. I don't know. I just really like that art. I like the Aurora. I like the writing on the back of the wall there, of the Ghastly card as well. So that's what I'm going to go with for my best art. All right, and then we'll throw it back over to Zach to see what his best art of the set is.
All right. My best art, hands down, Gyarados for me, and it's not really close. I had to think about it for a second. And the reason why I think about it is because it's really just the picture isolated with the sparkly blue background. But it looks like it's almost got like that dragon rage attack coming out of its mouth with the way it shines and sheens. That's why I love the Gyarados art, and I've always loved Gyarados as a Pokemon. We have, I believe, one more award, and I think this is a really hard award to give. This is the card that defines the set, or the card most associated with the set. And so I'll go first. My honorable mention is Gyarados, because this is the first Pokemon card I ever laid eyes on. My cousin Dylan had a binder of Pokemon cards, and Gyarados was his favorite. He had multiple copies of it, and I think I was like 4 or 5 at the time. But if we're gonna give something crazy an award here, it's got to be, to me, it's got to be Charizard. I mean, it is, to many people, the holy grail of Pokemon card collecting. It is probably the most favorite starter amongst all generations. It's not my personal favorite. I've probably shown my bias already towards my fat, turtly, flowery friend Venusaur. But if you ask anybody on the streets, name 3 Pokemon, the first 2 are usually Pikachu and Charizard. And I think that just shows like how dialed in this Charizard was.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go right off of that, and I'm gonna agree with you as well on the Charizard card there. I mean, it's infamous. It's like when the Logan Paul craze was going on with Pokemon. I mean, one of the things he did was, he bought a first edition Charizard. Because I mean, like when you think about collecting like Pokemon cards, like who wouldn't want one of those? Just for the pure fact that it is the Charizard card. Even if it's not your favorite. Now, I chose Charmander as my first starter. My first game was Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. I chose Charmander. But it's there's something about the Charizard card that definitely stands out, with just screaming, blowing out the flamethrower there. It's something iconic about that look. Not that the other hollows there for the starters are any less iconic, but this one definitely stands out, I think, among Pokemon fans, and why we do see it as the most expensive card there. I think there are other cards that play a more viable role in the card that define the set. Like you could say, like a lot of the trainers for what they're worth are, just because they continuously have an impact on today's game, just like all the future supporters that we talked about, or the double colorless energy. Those, although less talked about, and casual fans won't think of like the item cards. Like, who wants to think about the item cards? I want to think about the cool Pokemon. But I think those go a little unrecognized, and also deserves some credit. So even though my award goes to Charizard, I can't help but give a lot of honorable mentions to all the trainers that we talked about today that later influenced the game and how it shaped today's meta.
All right. The last kind of award here is this. I want to grade the set. And I think it's really hard, having never played base sets, like, base set standard, whatever. However, I'm thinking about this now, and it's like you had to start somewhere. So right off the back of that, I would give this an A. But I'm actually going to give it an A minus, and the only reason why is I think that there is some serious balance issues where the fighting and ground types are absurdly powerful in this set. Again, we talked at length about Hitmonchan. We've talked about, even Rain Dance Blastoise. But like, if you compare Rain Dance Blastoise to even Hitmonchan, I would argue that Hitmonchan is probably better most of the time. That being said, A minus is my grade. I wish it was cheaper because I would love to crack packs of it because I'm a degenerate. But again, it's probably a good thing it's not because I'm still in college. So
If I were to give a grade to this set, along some of the same bases as you, I'm going to be a little bit more harsh. I'm going to give it a B. Just because, we did see, like you said, they had to start somewhere, right? And I think, they didn't start off bad by any means. I think if they did, then the game would have just crashed and burned, no matter how many extra sets they put out. So it seems like they did put some thought into, actually seeing how the cards balance, even if they didn't see the effects of it first. Like, they didn't have any precedent of their own card game, so they could have maybe not seen why some of the cards would be as broken as they were. There weren't people like developing metas for years to know what cards would already be good just by looking at them for the first time. So I have to give a little leniency there, but at the same time, I think there was a lot of things that we got later on that would just prevent this set from becoming any better. Like, more options to look through your discard to get things out of there. And like you said, a lack of variety in the Pokemon, or just like unbalance with the types. Things that they figured out later. And I mean, that's still a struggle they have to this day even. Now I think they're getting better with it still, but there was more times, like, and I'm thinking like X and Y specifically, where typing was just a little off the walls sometimes. And just finding out how to balance those. So I'm going to give it a solid B, which isn't bad at all. There's some sets I can think of off the top of my head that are just going to be awful. So B is definitely not a bad place to start by any means.
it's always fun getting to chat with you, Austin, but also knowing that next week we have one of the coolest sets ever made in Pokemon. So next week, if you continue to listen to us, we'll be reviewing Jungle, which, yeah, this is one of the harder sets, I think, to grade, especially just looking at it from a bird's eye view without doing any research. So I'm so excited to talk about Jungle next week. Thank you to everybody who's listening right now, as we have rambled on and on and on. It is crazy just to think where Pokemon is nowadays compared to where it was
27
when the
years
set
ago.
came out. Yes, when the set comes out. I think it's just one of those crazy things. So that being said, thanks for listening. Wherever you are, enjoy our ramblings, enjoy our friendly banter conversation. And hopefully this will give you some incentive to go bust out your Pokemon card binder and show it off to your family and friends. And then tell them to listen to our show, because we would love to do the same with you. Austin, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, friend.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
With that, the Rotodex episode 1 base set is done.
Recording stopped.
Sir, thank
Awesome.
you.
We did it.
Yes, I will get this edited and I'll schedule it to have it posted. And then we'll just go from there, man. We'll just keep on keeping on.
All right. Well then, so not this Monday, but next Monday after that, I think should be it'll be a good Monday schedule. So as long as it goes well, and if we need to do anything, just let me know. Since we got this one done a little bit early, just in case anything goes wrong, then we'll have some time to see what we can do. So hopefully it all turns out good though. So
I would say we were on for almost 2 hours there, so I might have to cut some things out. Other than that, man, I honestly might just post the whole thing. I think we did a really good job on that first episode. So
yep.
I will chat with you later, and I'll make sure I let you know when everything's posted, so you can let all your friends know.
All right, sounds good.
All right, see you, man.
See ya.
Have fun streaming if you're gonna stream after this.
We'll see. I'm not sure yet.
All right, see you.
See you. Bye. Whew, so that was our first recording session. I'm gonna stretch it out a little bit. Not sure if anyone ended up coming in here. I don't see any chats, unfortunately. So if anyone's just hanging out, then say hi. I'm looking through my things here to see if there's anything I didn't get to talk about during the podcast. Oh, like the Squishmallows incident. Walmart released Squishmallows a little bit early. Their versions of them, at least, are kind of small. I think they're like $15, but they released them a little bit early, and they did. Apparently, Walmart has recalled them. Well, not recalled. They're not going to make customers return them. They already got them, but they're going to pull them back to the back of the store, and they're not supposed to be released until February, so they're just going to be chilling in the back of the stores, I guess. Some stores already got them, like you can see in this picture here. So I looked around for some. I didn't see any. I really wanted some. They just seem so squishable and mallowy. You know, the works. There was that. I didn't get to talk about the Cyrus and Clara challenge boxes that are coming out. You get full arts of those trainers, which are really cool. Both were used, obviously, Boss's Orders, a card that we talked about a little bit with, let's see, with Lysander going on there. But we are getting these boxes, which will be nice. I'm going to try to get my hands on some of those. Let's see, we don't need Lysander anymore. What else did I not talk about? Talked about all those. I'd say I got through like a very good portion of the cards. Oh, the art rare is coming back to the Sword and Shield. No, not Sword and Shield, that's what we just had. Scarlet and Violet TCG. So these cool little extra arts, not just like regular cards, but extra arts of Pokemon that tell a little bit of story. This one has an evolution line that tells a whole story, which is cool. Can't remember if I got to show off the rare candy that we eventually got. That was cool. Look at that Plasma Blast, I believe. Yeah, so I actually got through a lot of that stuff. I think we're doing that for about an hour and a half, and that's how long since I've been streaming on Twitch. So probably about how much work we got done. So very cool, very cool. I'm going to end my stream here now. We'll go watch some football or something. Something. Headrow or whatever. I don't know. Alright, so I will see you next time.